My face is acting a plum fool this week, but we're gonna do it anyway. Hey y'all, it's Brittney, and if you're a subscriber, welcome back to Makeup and Murder. If you are a first-time viewer and you just found my channel, before we go any further, make sure, because you know you're gonna like it anyway, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and also make sure you hit that notification bell so that you get notified whenever I post new videos on Makeup and Murder, Lovecraft Country, beauty, whatever it is, you will want to know about it. So let's make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now today, I'm really excited about this story. He was crazy, y'all. He was crazy. But today we are going to talk about the most infamous serial killer in the United States of America, and that is Samuel Little. So Samuel Little was born in 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, and he was born to a very young mom. I believe she was 16 years old when she had Sam, and according to Sam, his mom was a prostitute, but according to the census back then, his mom was actually a maid. Now, his mother's maiden name was Little, and his father's name was McDowell. So as we go through the story, you'll notice that he goes back and forth between both last names, but just wanted to let you guys know where those two last names are coming from. So Sam lived with his paternal grandmother, his father's mother, for the majority of his life. Later in his 20s, he did end up moving to Florida with his mom for a short time, and she passed shortly after that. So at that point, he really had no place to live and became kind of a transient, living out of his vehicles. So according to Sam, from a very young age, he thought about killing people. He says that he was inspired by the story of Gloria Ferry, who was strangled by her boyfriend, may have been her husband at the time, but she was strangled by Louis Statler, who was a wrestler, and he strangled her because she wanted to leave him. That's the story that inspired Sam Little. So at a very young age, he started having trouble in school. And then by his early teens, by the time he turned 13, he was already having run-ins with the law. So in 1954, he went to a reformatory school where he was admitted after he stole a bike. He got in so much trouble at the reformatory school that he didn't last more than a year or so. So shortly after that, in 1956, he was arrested for burglary, and from that arrest, he was sent to a juvenile detention center. So a little bit after that, it just keeps getting worse, y'all. In 1961, he was arrested and given 3 years in prison for breaking into a furniture store. And after that, he had just been in and out of prison, in and out of run-ins with the law, being arrested from everything from burglary to assault and battery, rape, all different types of things. Anything you can think of, he was arrested for it. And in 1966, he was arrested for the first time for the assault and battery of a woman. So in 1973, his mother passed away. And again, that's when he became a transient, moving around in his car, going from state to state, just traveling, not really living anywhere. So shortly after his mom passed, he met an older woman by the name of Aurelia Jean Dorsey. And he met her while he was in prison for a armed robbery charge. After he got out of prison, he and Jean Dorsey would travel together. So they ran pretty much a sting, or they had a thing where she, the older woman, would go in and shoplift some items, and Then she would turn them over to Sam, and Sam would sell those items to make money. So this is really how he made money to buy all the vehicles that he drove. So that's really how they made their money. He also had another traveling companion that he met in Alabama, and this person's name was Danny, and he'll be significant later down the line. Sam Little's target for his crime was usually women who were runaways or hitchhikers or sex workers or women that were addicted to drugs. Those were the type of women that he targeted. And in terms of his killing spree, he killed from 1970, January of 1970 was his first killing in Miami. And his last killing was in 2005, right outside of Tupelo, Mississippi. So he killed for 35 years. Y'all, 35 years. And the reason why he is the most prolific killer in US history is because he has claimed to have killed 93 women, and the FBI has in fact confirmed 50 of those cases. So let's jump into his crimes. So as I mentioned, his first murder was in 1970 in Miami, Florida. And the victim's name was Mary Brosley, and Sam Little met her at a bar, and she got in the car with him. He drove her to a secluded place. He strangled her, killed her, and buried her in a shallow grave. So later in 1976, September of 1976, Sam Little was arrested for raping a woman. He strangled her with an electrical cord. He beat her, he raped her, and he basically left her for dead. And y'all, he got 3 months of time in county jail. That was his sentence, 3 months. What is a woman's life worth? But this, we'll find out, is a pattern of justice not being served and the things that Sam Little does. So in November of 1982, Melinda Lepre was seen getting into a car with a man, and she was never seen after that again. Now, I wanted to give you guys some background on this first major victim because her background is pretty much the standard for all of Sam Little's victims, where he again is looking for sex workers or runaways or hitchhikers or drug addicts. Those were the victims that he targeted. So specifically with Mindy, her mom died while she was giving birth to a sibling at a very young age for Mindy. And her dad was an abusive father. So it was really up to the siblings to take care of each other. And for Mindy, she's a very tough kid. She didn't listen, didn't follow the rules. And by the age of 12, she was already using lots of drugs, lots of alcohol. And by the time she was in high school, she was really, really, really sexually active. So she ended up moving away from home. She ended up moving to Mississippi and she started to sell drugs. She had a kid and she became a sex worker. Now, that's the background, that's her background. And again, it really just sets precedent for all of the victims. They all come from similar backgrounds. They were all sex workers or hitchhikers or drug addicts, we'll find. So Sam Little picked her up as a sex worker, and witnesses saw her get in the car with him, and he was arrested shortly after her murder for shoplifting, and he and his car fit the description of the person that witnesses saw Mindy get into the car with, and they arrested him originally for her murder, but things kind of fell apart when a witness came forward saying that she saw them at Mindy's hotel and Sam dropped her off at her hotel. So they did not have enough evidence to convict him of her murder, especially when there's witnesses saying that he actually dropped her off at her hotel room. Now, we do later find out that, according to Sam, he told her You know, go into your hotel room. I'll drop you off, make everybody think that I've dropped you off so they won't be in our business. And then you just come out and I'll pick you up around back. So we find that out later once he's confessing to all of these murders. But at the time, the police didn't know that. So they dropped the charges against him and they turned him over to Florida police because they also had a case that Sam looked really good for and their evidence seemed to be better to be able to go to court with. Now, the Florida case that he looked good for was the murder of Patricia Mount. Now, this particular victim was found in the middle of a hayfield and she was completely nude. Now, he was already in custody, again, because the Mississippi police had turned him over to Florida police. And they also were able to grab his travel companion, Danny, who said that Sam was not with them that night. And when he came back to the hotel room that they had been staying in at the time, Miss Jean cleaned the car for him and he noticed that the car smelled like feces and Miss Jean cleaned that up for Sam. Now, the other evidence that they had against Sam was his hair was found on the victim's clothes. And I believe it was a pubic hair that was found on the victim's clothes. And his attorney argued that, well, that pubic hair just got transferred onto her clothes while they were dancing at the bar. They go to trial and they're counting on Danny to be the star witness and he disappears. So their star witness disappears and they pretty much have no case. So the jury came back and found Sam not guilty of the murder. This is yet another opportunity where Sam could have been put behind bars, but our good old justice system allowed him to walk free. Now, there was another incident in Florida. We all know how lovely Florida is, but another incident in Florida where Sam picked up a sex worker on a quote unquote date. And he drove to like a secluded manufacturing area. And as he, you know, was doing his normal thing of raping and choking, he sees police officers pull up behind him and he gets out of the car. And the police officers assume that he is trying to break into the manufacturing plant. And they look into the car and there is a naked dead body on the floor in the car that he just strangled. And they look into the car and I don't know if they just did not feel like dealing with the case at that time. They look into the car, they give him a warning and tell him to get out of the area. So yet another chance for somebody to do something about Samuel Little, who again killed 93 women. And he gets away yet again, caught red-handed with a dead body in his car, still warm, still warm. So now we're in 1984, July of 1984. And he finds another woman and her name is Mary Jo Payton. He meets her at a bar and he says, well, hey, let's go get some more alcohol. Let's keep this party going. So she gets in the car with him. She leaves the bar with him. He takes her to a manufacturing area and he does his thing. He strangles her, he kills her, and he leaves her in the manufacturing plant. And she's not found for some time. So when they do find her, decomposition has obviously already set in. Now, these are just cases on top of cases on top of cases. They're just piling up and some good police work would have done some justice here, but Lord. So in 1984, Lori Barros goes to the police and she tells them that she had been kidnapped and she was repeatedly strangled and allowed to come to, and then strangled again and allowed to come to, and that she was also raped by this person, and she was able to give a very, very detailed description of the perpetrator. She was also able to give a very good description of the car that he was driving. So police go and they go to search for this particular vehicle, and they go to the same area where she was actually found after Sam Little left her for dead. And lo and behold, Sam Little is in the exact same place as he was when he attacked Lori. And this time he was attacking another woman while the police pull up. This woman's name was Tanya Jackson. Now, he hops out of the car as the police pull up. The police say, "Come over here. We need to talk to you." And as he gets out of the car, he's fixing his pants, pulling his pants back up, buckling up his pants. And he says, "Oh no, officers, me and my wife are in the car. We had an argument and now we're making up. Nothing to see here." And of course, this time they're not buying that story this time. So they cuff him immediately and they go to check on the woman in the car. Now, mind you, he got out of the car, pulling his pants up. He has scratches all over him. And they walk up to the car and they see a woman that's bleeding from her mouth area, her nose area. She's unconscious. She's in a very awkward position and she's naked. So obviously this is not his wife and they are not having makeup sex at the moment. So he is arrested and he is taken in. And thank God they actually pulled up on him mid-action because that saved Tanya's life. So they take him downtown, they take him in and they question him, and he confesses that she's not his wife. She is actually, in fact, a sex worker. And he does admit to strangling her, but he refuses to admit that he raped her. And I feel like this is a big thing that we see in true crime when we're hearing these stories of men attacking women in sexual ways. They will admit to everything else, but being called a rapist is like the ultimate worst word in the world. You can be a killer, you can be a robber, anything. Just a rapist, they will not. Pause while I put on my lashes. Now back to the story. So they try Sam Little for Lori and Tanya's cases. They think they have some really good witnesses. Both of them live to tell the story. So we get to court and Miss Lori finally discloses that she lied about being kidnapped and that she was actually a sex worker and she lied about being raped, but everything else that happened was the truth. And Miss Tanya decided that she could not testify against her attacker sober. So Miss Tanya decided she was going to show up drunk to the courthouse. So both of those testimonies went to shit. So then they also have 71-year-old Miss Jean show up in her Sunday best with her Sunday hat, claiming that she's his wife and she's been traveling with him this entire time and he has never done anything to hurt anyone. She's never seen a bad bone in his body. Meanwhile, he's beating her everywhere they go. But this is what she gets on the stand and says. Sam also testifies on his own behalf, claiming that him and Tanya got into an argument because Miss Tanya wanted to cheat him out of the services that he paid for. So they go to deliberate, the jurors go to deliberate, and they come back as a hung jury. And when they find out what hung the jury, it was astounding. So it was 9 to acquit, 3 to convict. So they knew that they couldn't take it to trial again. So they offered him a plea deal and he accepted the plea deal. He gets a 4-year prison sentence and only serves 30 months. Sam is back out on the streets, and by 1991, he's killing again. And this time, his victim is a woman named Rose Evans. And he found Rose Evans in the back of a building with 5 other men smoking crack. So he convinces her to come with him, and he strangles her and rapes her and leaves her in a deserted area and covers her body with tires. Luckily, the police found her relatively quickly after she was murdered, and they could tell before decomposition set in that she was strangled. So Sam Little's last victim was Nancy Stevens in 2005, and this took place just outside of Tupelo, Mississippi. And her family said that after having her son, she became addicted to crack cocaine, so much like the other victims. She was highly susceptible to this type of, unfortunately, this type of attack. And they said that she would always come back if she would disappear, you know, from her addiction. She would disappear for a while, but she would always find her way back home to her family. And the last time that she disappeared, she never found her way back. Later, just for her family to find out that she was actually Sam Little's last victim. Now, in 2012, Sam Little is arrested at a homeless shelter after his DNA is found to be a match in the murder of Carol Elford. Now, Carol was murdered back in 1987, and this was just 5 months after Sam Little was released from that supposed to be 4-year sentence that ended up being 30 months. They also got DNA hits on Audrey Nelson, who was murdered in 1987, and then Guadalupe Adepaca, who was murdered in 1989. So in 2014, he was convicted of all 3 murders, and he got 3 consecutive life sentences from those murder convictions. And then here's where the story starts to get really interesting. And this is where all of the other murders we find out about come in. So in 2018, the FBI wanted to talk to him specifically about the murder of Denise Brothers, which took place in Odessa, Texas. And the FBI worked together with a Texas Ranger by the name of Jim Holland. And Jim was known for being really good at getting people to confess, getting people to open up to him. So they bring Sam Little in to speak with Jim Holland. They know a little bit about Sam, and they know that it doesn't take much to get him to talk if he trusts you. Basically, you just need a bag of peanut M&Ms and, you know, maybe some McDonald's, and talk to him nicely, and you can get him to kind of open up and trust you. Jim comes in and starts to build rapport with Sam, and Sam starts to open up and to tell his stories, and he does confess to the murder of Denise in Odessa. So they are able to close that case, but the floodgates sort of open at that point. So what happens is he trusts Jim so much that he says, hey, as long as you take the death penalty off the table, I'll talk. I have nothing to lose. And Jim offered to, you know, bring the paperwork in advance of taking the death penalty off the table, and offered him extradition to a more comfortable place closer to Jim in Texas. He was in California at the time, and he was not particularly fond of the LAPD. Jim came in with the paper saying, we'll take the death penalty off the table for these murders. And he had the detectives that were coming in, and I mean, they were coming in. Everybody from all over the country was wanting to talk to Sam Little about whether it was Jane Doe murders that he could probably close for them, or just open missing persons cases that they thought would be tied to Sam Little in some way. So Jim Holland says, hey, you can come talk to him, but make sure that when you come talk to him, you have that piece of paper that says, we won't give you the death penalty for confessing to these murders. And the detectives did, and they were able to confirm 50 cases that Sam Little had taken and strangled, raped, and murdered these women and left them for dead. 50 cases. There are still 43 more cases that are unsolved. And there are drawings, which is really, really creepy. He could remember his victims down to the way they wore their hair, the makeup they had on that day, the clothing that they were wearing. I mean, he remembered everything about his victims. And he would relive these stories as he was talking to the detectives. And just being able to relive those stories, it gave him pleasure. And there was even very awkward times. And you can see it if you've watched any documentary where they have the tapings of him in the confession room talking to the police officers. He's even at sometimes touching himself under the table while these grown men are in the room with him as he's telling these stories and talking about these women that he murdered, literally pleasuring himself while reliving the crimes. That is how sick Sam Little is, because he's still alive. That is how sick he is. He's a weak, fragile man these days. He's in a wheelchair. He has some conditions, definitely, but he's a weak, frail man at this point, and he's living out the rest of his days in a California prison. And thank God for that. All right, you guys, so this is the final makeup look. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about Sam Little's crazy story. And let me know what you think about the makeup look. Are there any other stories you'd like me to cover? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, make sure that you're subscribed to my channel. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to hit the notification bell so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. Other than that, love you guys. Bye.